What's going on, guys? Peyton Smith here, and today we are covering a super comprehensive Webflow tutorial that is going to take you from complete Webflow beginner and amateur and give you all the tools that you need to get in, create an account, build a website, and then publish it and take it live. So we're going to cover everything in this video. I know there are a lot of other tutorials out there, but my goal is that this one is going to be quicker, more efficient. It's going to show you the most important things that you need to know, and then it's going to help you get a website finished and live faster than any other tutorial. So let's jump into it.
We are here on the Webflow homepage, and the first thing that you're going to need to do is click Get Started. And all Webflow is going to ask you for is an email and a password. You can sign in with Gmail or just click this blue button to continue with any type of email. Once you sign in, Webflow is going to take you to this next page where it's actually going to ask you for your name or how they should greet us. And they're going to ask us a couple questions, which is going to put us in the right direction for what we're trying to accomplish with Webflow. And so what best describes your role? We're going to put web designer. Who will you be building the site for? I'm going to go ahead and put my business for starters. And then do you have any experience building websites? Let's just put used website builders. What Webflow is going to do is it's going to process what we're trying to accomplish, and it is going to throw us into a good scenario where we can get done what we need to do. So what it's going to do is give us the option to either do a business starter, which is just a basic template, or a blank site. And in this example, we're going to go ahead and move forward with the blank site. And Webflow is going to launch us into the designer. Now, the designer is where everything happens. Once this loads, you're going to see our big white canvas that's overwhelming. We'll close out of this tutorial. And this canvas is where we're going to design our website. Okay, now before we can dive into that, and before I show you an example of a quick website we're going to build, you need to understand all of the tools. First, over here on the left side, you have your main Webflow tab, which is going to take you either back to your dashboard to see all of your different websites, or take you into the individual website settings, which is where you're going to manage hosting plans and setting up your domain and different things like that. And then you've got your editor, which is just a more simplified version of your designer here, where you can just make adjustments to text and images and then your CMS items, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. The next thing that you've got is your add button right here. Now this is going to be very similar to other website builders that you've used, because you're going to be able to select the elements that you want to put in your site, and you're just going to drag and drop. And so, for example, you've got your layout, which is your sections, your containers, your columns. You've got basic elements, which are your div blocks, lists, and buttons. You've got all of your typography, your CMS, which again we'll talk about here shortly. We've got all of your media, so images and videos, and then of course Lottie animations, which are really, really awesome, but a more complex topic for another video. You've got all of your form elements here, and then you've got some additional components. And so in this example, just to get started, we're going to go ahead and move a section over here into the body. Now, I want to take a moment here to explain to you the way that Webflow works. Webflow works on something called the box model, or that's known as the box model. And what that means is every single element within your website, everything down to the text and the images, is a box within a box within a box. Okay, so what that means is rather than using your body here and just dragging a heading right into your body, which makes no sense, what you're going to actually do is you're going to work with this box model by taking the section, and then I'm going to put a container within the section, and then I'm going to put my heading within the container. Now this is going to be absolutely necessary for a number of different reasons, but the number one reason is so you have more design capabilities. Because if you put everything within your homepage or your body block, if you make any sort of adjustment, it's going to change every single thing within your body block. Okay. And so now that we've got this set up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on these guides down here so you can kind of see these different boxes. So we've got our H1, we've got our container, we've got our section, and then our body. And so that's how we're going to have things set up, okay? And so before we move forward with this example, a couple more things that you need to understand are, number one, the Navigator, which is a super easy way for you to basically see the elements in this box model like we talked about, right? We've got our body, our section, our container, and our heading. But you're going to be able to see every single element on your page within this Navigator, which makes it easy to find elements. It makes it easy to reorganize things, drag and drop things. Let's say I want, for example, let's take this section and we duplicate this. Now you're going to be able to see both of these sections in the box model, and say I want to drag one above the other. I'm going to be able to make any changes like that in the Navigator. And this is going to be a lot more important, a lot more useful when you have a ton of different sections and a ton of different elements on your page. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to erase this section that we just made, and the next thing that we're going to dive into really quickly is the Pages tab. Now this is pretty obvious. You're going to be able to bounce back and forth between your pages. You can create new pages. You can actually create folders to organize your pages, and then of course you can get into each individual page setting and adjust your title. You're going to be able to adjust the link slug. You're going to be able to make changes to meta descriptions and your open graph URL images. The next thing that we've got over here is our CMS collection, which again, CMS is a more complex topic for another video. It's not something that you're going to need in your first website, but to give you a basic idea of what this is and when it's used. When I build a website for a client that has a blog in it, I don't want to hand over this website and tell them every time that you have a new blog article, you're going to have to go into the site, create a new page, redesign the page, and then put in your text. So instead, what I can do is I can create CMS pages with CMS items, and I basically tell Webflow exactly how I want the content to be designed and laid out. And then once I design it once, I actually pass the CMS dashboard to the client, and then they just go through and fill all the fields. So they put in the title, they put in the body content, the images, a thumbnail image, anything else that they need to. And once they click publish, Webflow actually uses your CMS pages to duplicate that content. They implement it into the website with the design and everything that you've already done, which saves a ton of time and gives you a lot of capabilities. You can also use CMS when it comes to adding or removing team members. Maybe you have products on your website. Blog articles are a really powerful way to utilize this, and that's again something that we'll dive into in another video. But the last things that you're going to need to know, obviously you've got your e-commerce button, which we're not going to use because this isn't an e-commerce site. You've got your assets where you can upload images and videos. And then of course you've got your settings right over here. All right, we are moving along and we are going to start talking now about this right side toolbar, which is where the magic happens, okay? This is where everything to do with the design and the visual appeal of your website, any adjustments that you need to make to sizes and alignment and padding and spacing and all these different things are going to happen right here, okay? And the first thing that you're going to need to know, which is really at the core or the foundation of Webflow and is probably the most powerful feature that Webflow offers, is your selectors here. And this is where we're going to be utilizing classes to streamline the design of our website. And so to give you an example of this, we've got a heading right here, and we are actually going to give this the class of homepage heading, okay? Now what this means is now every time a title anywhere on the website that shares this same class, anytime that you make an adjustment to that, whether that's to the font or to the size or to the color or to the background, whatever it is, those changes are going to be made to every single title that shares this class. And so to give you a good example of this, I'm just going to copy and paste this over. So both of these headings you can see over here, they share that same class. And so when I blow up this text, it's going to do it to both of these titles because they share that same class. So let's say this is the heading and we want it to be really big and we want it to be really blue. So we want it to be big and blue. It's going to make adjustments for both of these. But let's just say that for the sake of this, these are both headings on different pages. This one is the home page, but this home page heading, we actually want to add a subclass because we want it to be a little bit smaller. So what I can do is I can add an additional class to get more specific about the design of this heading. So still, if I go back to this main homepage heading class, every change that I make is going to happen to both of these. But now that I've added a more specific class to the second one called smaller tiny, when I make adjustments to this, it's only going to change this individual title. And so this gives you a really good idea of how you can streamline all of your titles, all of your body text, all of your sections, all of your div blocks, whatever it is. you streamline those across your website. So anytime you make changes, it's going to make those changes across the entire site. Now, an example of this is one of my early on clients. I built them a site in Wix, and they actually went back and said, we love everything, but we want all of the titles on all 50 pages to be in all caps. Now, I'm sure that there's an easier way to do this on Wix, and I was probably a dummy back then, but I actually had to go through to each individual page and retype the headings in all caps. Now, in Webflow, what I would have done to get that done faster is I would have just clicked this main heading that shares the same class as all the other headings. I would have scrolled down here and clicked capitalize, and it's going to capitalize all of those headings. But then for whatever reason, if I have this other heading that I'm like, I actually don't want this one capitalized, because it's got this additional class to get more specific, I can actually untoggle that all capitalized heading, and it's going to adjust just that single heading. So that's the way that these selectors work, and it's important to remember that they don't only work on headings, they work on literally any element. So any element that you find over here, whether that's a section, a column, a link block, a heading, an image, a form block, whatever it is, you can add classes to streamline your design process, okay? Now, once you've done that, the next important thing that you're going to need to understand is your display or your layout options. And this is, again, going to be at the foundation of the design of every single element, okay? And so to give you an example of these, I'm actually going to add a little bit of padding to this section to make it a bigger example for you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag in a div block, and let's go ahead and erase these headings. I'm going to drag a div block into my container, so again, using the box model, and I'm going to show you these. And this div block, I actually want this to be 100 pixels by 100 pixels, so we're going to make a square, okay? Now what I want to do is, this is titled div block. I actually want to add actually I'm going to duplicate this after I add a background color. Let's go ahead and make this guy blue. I'm going to copy and paste this, and in my second div block, I'm actually going to do a more specific class titled red, and now I can change the background of this, and we've got our red block and our blue block within this container. Now, because the container is what's known as the parent element, that is going to determine the layout of our boxes or our elements within that container. And we do that with the display settings. And so what we've got is our block element display setting, which is just the default. And then what we have is our flex layout, which is the one I use 99% of the time. Now you can see when I click that, it actually gives me a ton of different options, whether I want to go horizontal or vertical. Let's say that I want to do vertical, I want it to be in the center, and then for the sake of this example, I'm going to go to the container and make this container 500 pixels tall. And so now when I'm adjusting this, I can actually have it tell the container how to space out these blocks. So maybe I want them smushed to the bottom or smushed to the top or right to the middle and to the left. And you can see how making these adjustments is going to move these children elements or child elements around. The other options that you have are your div block, which again is just going to add more boxes to our box model. You've also got your inline block and then your inline options, which again are used in very specific scenarios, but for the sake of your first website, really you're only going to need to know how to use this flex layout, okay? That is a really powerful way to make adjustments to all of the blocks with inside a bigger block. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep these div blocks, but I'm actually going to come back in and add a heading within this container. And let's make this vertical, bring the heading to the top, and then I'm going to blow this heading up so it's really obvious to see. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here into my add, and I'm going to add a paragraph. This is going to be my subheading. Now I want this to be a little bit shorter, so I'm just going to delete some of this text. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to blow this up to, let's say, 25, give it a little bit more line height. And what we have now is our heading and our subheading. Now, the next important thing that you're going to want to understand is your spacing. And this is really self-explanatory, but a really powerful tool, because you can actually adjust the padding on the inside of a box or on the outside of a box. And so you'll notice that by default, this heading has margin on both the top and the bottom, 20 pixels on the top and 10 on the bottom. If we want this heading to have more space underneath it, I can actually click and drag this out, and you'll see how that is making space between the bottom of the heading and the top of the subheading, okay? Now you can also edit or adjust the inside of this by clicking and dragging these, and you'll see what that does. And actually, I'm going to hold the shift button and do all four. You can see how it's pushing this heading into the middle of its own box. Now that's not something that you're going to want to do very often with text, but something that very often you'll want to do with a div block, because if I actually move this heading inside the div block, you're going to see now that that heading is within that block. And if I adjust the inner padding, it's going to push that out like that and give padding between the heading and the div block. So that's a really good example or use case for using that. But those are going to help you make all the adjustments that you're going to need to make. As we scroll down, we've got a couple things as far as your overflow and fit, which you won't have to worry about too much on this first build. Same with position. But as we get down here, then you've got all of your adjustments as far as typography, and then you've got your background. Now, background is a really powerful tool because there really are two ways to add images to your website. Number one is to drag images directly in, or number two is to use an image as a background. To show you how this works, first I'm just going to drag a regular image into our container here. I can click Choose Image, and then it takes me immediately to my Assets tab, to where I can upload an image, and that will load in, and there I have got my image. And so typically images are going to fill up the box that they're found within, but you can actually have the option to drag to the size of your image, or of course up here on the right toolbar you can adjust the width and the height, okay? Now, one issue that you might sometimes run into is if you want this width to be, let's say 400px, your container, let's say that it is set to stretch. Actually, let's go horizontal and stretch. And so what you're going to find is sometimes it can get frustrating when you set the width, but because of the display of the container, it's going to stretch that image, okay? And so a couple different options you have is obviously you can come in here to the image and you can try to guesstimate the height in pixels, and just keep doing this until you find the right height. But this is an absolutely crappy solution. And so the other options that you have is you can determine your layout, and maybe you just want to push everything to the top, and that will automatically fix that image. But one thing that I also like to do with images if I'm trying to get a background, so what I'm going to do in this example is I'm going to take a div block, place it in here, I'm going to set it to, let's say 400 pixels, and the height is going to be 300 pixels. Now what I can actually do is scroll down here to this backgrounds image and gradient, and I can click the plus here, and I can choose an image and actually input this image into the background, and what I can do is press cover, and that image is going to fill this div block, okay? Now the nice part about this is when I make adjustments to that div block, let's say that down here I want to adjust the radius, let's take that to 100, you can see how the radius changes on the div block, and the image of course only fills that space, and so it'll round the corners of the image as well. Now this is kind of nice because you can also adjust the width, let's say to 500px, to 600px, and it's going to just continually fill that div block with that image. This background feature is especially useful when you are working with your sections. Let's say that this section is going to become our main hero section on our homepage. What I can do is make sure this section is selected, click my background image here, and then I can plug in this image, set to cover again, and then I can set this right to the middle position. And just like that, we've got a great background image where our text is running over the image. Now, obviously, there's not a whole lot of contrast here. And so what we can actually do is come back to the image and gradient. I can actually add a second image or gradient. And what I can do is set a solid color overlay. And then I can actually adjust the opacity of this specific color. And just like that, I can make the background dark, come in here back to my text, and I can change these colors, of course, and just like that, I have a nice dark background image with my text overlay, and then I'm well on my way to creating a nice hero section and a nice homepage. And so the image and gradient tool is really, really useful. You can also get in here, if I erase both of these, you're actually able to get in here and also set a gradient, and you can adjust the colors and really do whatever you'd like with this to get things looking exactly the way that you would like them to. So after the image and gradient, down here we've got just a couple other features. We've got our radius, our borders, which are pretty self-explanatory and are going to be easy for you to learn. We've got our opacity and other effects down here, which again are nice to use. You can click those and see how they affect the different elements on your site, but they're not things that you're going to have to use very often, okay? So what we're going to do now is click over here to this cog menu. This is just a secondary settings menu that's going to give you more settings when it comes to your individual elements. For example, your header, you're going to be able to choose, is it H1, H2, H3. You're going to have different settings throughout this tab, but again, not one that you're going to have to use super often. And then, of course, over here we have our style manager, which is very similar to our navigation tab on the left, but it's showing just our styles and our classes. And then the last one is our interactions, which again is a video for another day, but you're going to be able to access all of your interactions right there and get things to move and change as you scroll through your site or when you click on different elements, which is a really powerful feature. So now that we've covered these things, the last thing that I wanted to cover before we jump into our site settings are up here at the top. Obviously, we have our different viewport widths, and so we can actually see things in our desktop, our tablet, our mobile landscape, and then in our regular mobile portrait. And so as you click on these, it's actually going to show you how things work and how they're going to look in these different viewports. And so obviously, if our heading is massive on our desktop, but when we come down to our mobile, it's way too big, I can actually get in here and just change this. I can shrink it down a little bit to make sure that it fits, and you'll notice that it's not going to change that in the desktop version. So I can start to design for different viewports. Obviously, designing for mobile is super, super important, but you're going to have complete control over the way things interact. You can change literally anything, and it's going to look differently in mobile than it will in desktop, which gives you so much power. And that is one thing that has been a big struggle for a lot of designers using builders like Wix or Squarespace, because they just make it really difficult to have complete control over the different, the website and the way it looks in different viewports, okay? So up here in your top right, you have your publish, which this is automatically going to publish to a temporary domain, which makes it really easy for you to see the live site and also send a temporary link to a client so they can kind of follow your progress. You also are going to have the ability up here to click on your little eye, and this is going to give you kind of a live view of the site within the designer, which is very, very useful. Okay, so before I dive into a design of a very basic landing page, what I want to do is take you up here to the project settings and show you all the important settings that you need to know when working with Webflow. Okay, you've got your general tab here, which is your site name and your temporary subdomain name, which you can adjust as long as it's one that's available. You're going to be able to use whatever domain you like. Down here you've got your favicons and your web clips to set the image, which of course shows up here in the tab and in other locations. And then you've got a couple additional settings down here, including your site statistics, which is going to show you views, unique visits, different things like that. Clicking over here, we have our hosting, where you are going to choose a hosting plan. Now, the way that Webflow works is on a free plan at any given time, you can have 2 sites that are unhosted in the development stage. So what that means is you can have 2 at a time. Once you select a hosting plan and connect a domain to one of those, that's going to open up one of your slots. So then you can start a new website to be in the development phase and be working towards hosting that and taking it live, okay? So when it comes to your site plans, there are really only 2 site plans right now that you're going to need to worry about, and that is your basic and your CMS. Again, CMS is going to be necessary if you have CMS items implemented on your website. If you purchase a Webflow template or you find a free one, chances are that those are going to have CMS items in that site. So unless you delete all of those CMS items, you're going to have to choose this more expensive hosting plan. The one kicker is I always use this CMS hosting plan because it also gives you access to your content editor dashboard, which is something I pass to my clients so they can make adjustments to their site, they can manage form submissions, all of those different things. But if you are making just a super basic site, no CMS items, you're not worried about sending an editor dashboard to a client. For example, if this is for your own portfolio site, this may be a good option to go a little bit cheaper on the hosting. Obviously, these are cheaper on the annual plans. If you flip them to monthly and you're paying month to month, it's going to be a bit more expensive. But either way, you're going to be happy with either of these plans. Just keep in mind that if you want to use those CMS items and the CMS structure or the content editor dashboard, you're going to have to choose the CMS hosting. Now, the thing that I love about this, you're going to be able to connect your custom domain down here. Even if this is for a client site, you're going to be able to connect your domain. But as we come over here to the billing section, you'll notice once you set up your personal billing, you have this option to do client billing. Now, what that means is if I build a site for a client, I don't want to have to pay their monthly hosting out of pocket and then hope that they reimburse me for that. And so what you can do is you can plug in their information, their name, their email, their phone number, and then that's going to generate a link that you can then forward on to your client where they can put their own credit card information in to pay their hosting. Now, client billing has a lot of cool settings where you can actually upsell them, and let's say that they choose the CMS hosting that's $20 per month. I could actually set the price at $23 per month, and then Webflow would give me that $3 difference, which is a nice upsell option. It's not something I do very often because I want to keep my clients' hosting prices as low as possible because they're already investing with me in other monthly services, and an extra $3 a month doesn't matter to me as much as keeping my clients happy, but you've always got that option, okay? You've also got the SEO tab, which gives you a couple SEO settings. You've, of course, got your fonts, your backups, which you can restore an old version of your site, and then you've got your custom code section. And so with this, you really have a good understanding of all of the settings that you might need to know or to understand. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to dive back into the designer, and we are actually going to build a really quick landing page to show you all the things that you've learned in this video. So let's jump into it. All right, we are back into our designer, and I'm actually going to erase everything that we've done so far so we have a blank canvas. And what we're going to be doing is creating a really quick and simple landing page. I'm going to show you a couple additional tricks throughout this part, but in just a few minutes I'm going to give you a really good idea of what can be built in Webflow, okay? So we're here at our body box, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a section, and down here in the height, one thing that I always like to do is set this header section to 100 VH, which means the viewport height, okay? So what that means is that the height of the viewport is going to change based on the size of your screen, but I always want it to cover the entire screen, okay? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop down here to the image and gradient, and we're going to give a nice gradient background. So what we'll do is let's give this a kind of a deep navy blue, and on this color let's give it a lighter blue. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this little circle here to adjust the direction of that. And I have my hero section. I'm actually going to change this class to hero section. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a container. Now you notice that the container automatically pops to the top, and the reason for that is within my hero section I have the display set to the default, which is block. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and select the flex layout. I'm going to go vertical, and I'm going to put this thing right smack dab in the middle, okay? Now with that in the middle, I'm going to bring in a header within my box. And so again, just as a reminder, over here in the Navigator, we're starting to work on our box model. It's a box within a box within a box. And so with my H1, I'm actually going to turn this white, and I'm going to blow this sucker up to, let's say, 90. I want to increase the line height just so I'm not squishing that text. And let's title this Webflow Tutorial. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a paragraph for our subheading, and I'm going to put it inside the container as well. Now obviously that text is too small and there's no contrast, so I'm going to turn that white. Let's blow this up to maybe 22, increase the line height, and I'm actually going to shorten this text a little bit so you can get a better idea of what it would look like. And so just like that, we've got our subheading. I want to add a little bit of a margin beneath the header, so let's increase this to, maybe let's go 30, right in the middle. And then what I'm going to do is I want to add a call to action. Now we haven't worked with buttons yet in this tutorial, but they are really simple to use. I'm going to drag, oops, I actually grabbed the form button. Right here, I'm going to grab the button under my basic tab, plug that in, and this is my default button. Now what I want to do is I actually want to turn this thing green so there's a little bit more contrast. So right there, I turn it green, and I want to increase the font of the text in there to make it a little bit more noticeable. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to increase the padding inside this button. And again, when you increase the padding on the inside, you'll see how that increases the space between the text and basically the form of the box. And so once I blow that up, I'm going to make my call to action learn Webflow today, an exclamation point. I want a little bit of padding on top of this, a little bit of a margin just to give it some space. So let's go 20 right there. And then I actually want to add, I'm going to scroll down here and add a radius to this. I actually want to go 100 to make that completely rounded. Now with things like buttons, you actually have a lot of options when it comes to the hover effects, because obviously when people hover over a button, we want them to know that it's a button, and we want it to change a little bit to, I guess, validate that it's going to do something when they click it. And so when I click on this button, I can actually go up here to my selector tab, and if I click this, it actually gives me the different states of this button. And so if I click hover right here, you'll notice that this adds a temporary class selector for hover. Now what this does is I can change this. So let's say I want this to go a little bit brighter when they hover, and then I'm actually going to exit out of that by just clicking anywhere, and it removes that temporary green selector. Now anytime I hover over my button, it is going to make that button change colors. Okay, that's a really nice feature to add to really anything you can have it change as you hover or scroll past it. But just like that, we have our call to action. I'm actually going to make the text a little bit smaller. And we are good to go. Okay. Now the next thing that I want to do is I'm actually going to throw in a nav bar up here at the top. And again, I want to make sure within my Navigator tab that my nav bar isn't accidentally inside my hero section. Nav bar works much like a section where you want it to be directly in the body box. And so one thing about the navigation is these can sometimes be janky when you pull them directly in from your add button, and so you may have to make a couple adjustments. But what I'm going to do with this nav bar is I actually want to make it black for starters to make it really stand out. And then up here on my nav links, I want to turn these white. Now you'll notice when I turn this white, only one at a time turns white. That's because the other ones don't have a class selector yet. And so when I turn this white, it automatically gave it the class selector of navlink. I'm actually going to come through and paste this same selector into these other navlinks. And so now when I change them, because they share a class, they're going to all change together. So I'm going to give those an underline, the same font size, and there we go. So with that, what I want to do in this brand link is I actually want to bring in a logo. So I'm actually going to click here, go up to my image, and drag a logo into here. I'm going to be able to choose the image. Now let's pull this from one of my images, and it's going to bring in this client logo. Now you'll notice that this thing is absolutely massive, so I'm going to want to drag this down to a size that fits. Now one thing that you'll notice is it's sitting kind of janky in there, and so these are some adjustments that you might have to make with these types of things. But let's say that I want to make my height of this 60 pixels, and I actually guesstimated that the first time where it's going to go the full width of my navigation, and then within that brand I can actually switch this to flex and move that logo right to the middle. Now a quick little tip for you, you'll notice that this logo doesn't, there's not a whole lot of contrast on that black background. You can remake the logo and make it all white or change the colors to add more contrast. But another thing that you have the option to do is you can select this image, scroll down here, and in your filters under these effects, you can actually select a filter, and one of the filters is invert. Now you can see when I do this, it's actually going to invert the colors and add a little bit more contrast to that logo. So there we have Client Earth, okay? Now, once I've added this nav bar, you'll notice that it's kind of pushing my my hero section a little bit too low, and so I actually might want to come and make this only 90% of the viewport height. That way it's not getting too deep because I don't want to waste real estate on my website, okay? The next thing that I'm going to do is I want to add a strip or a section that's going to highlight my other clients' logos. And so I'm going to add a section in here. Again, if we look at our navigator, I'm going to close all these, and you can see that we've got the nav bar, the here section, and now we have this new section that I'm actually going to give a class for client logo section. Okay. Now, because we're using our box model, I'm going to come down and put a container inside of that. And I actually want to give my section a little bit of padding here just so we have something to work with. And you can see once I give that padding, it actually pushes that into the middle and gives us some space to work with. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to implement the grid layout. And so I'm going to plug this grid in here. And you can see that it automatically gives you a 2x2. I actually want to come over here and delete one of the rows, and I want to add 2 columns. And so I've got my strip of 4 boxes there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to my images. I'm going to slide an image into this grid, and I'm going to choose some client images. For the sake of this, they'll be the same as our main logo. And then I can actually copy and paste these all the way through, and there I have my client logos. Now let's say that I feel like these are a little bit too big. What I'm going to want to do is actually give these a class, and then I can set let's say our max width is 80%, and you can see that that starts to shrink that down to only 80% of the box. Now, it didn't change the other ones because they don't yet share the same class, and so what I could do is copy and paste this class to the other images, but what I'm actually going to do is just erase these, because now that this first one has a class set, I can copy and paste it, and it will paste with the client logo selector class, okay? Now, because these are all on they're aligned left within the box, I can actually double click on my grid. Actually, I don't need to double click. I can come right up here to align, and I can center all of these within that. And just like that, I have my client logo section. If I want to add a little bit of space between them, I can double click then, and I can add maybe 25 pixels between columns. And just like that, we have our client section. The next thing I want to do is come down and add a third and final section, and this is actually going to be our form section. Now again, I'm going to put a container into this section. I always like to give myself a little bit of padding in these sections to give me room to work with. And then within my container, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring another heading. Now this heading is going to be my H2 because it's obviously not the main idea, but I'm still going to blow this up to a reasonable size. And you'll notice that it automatically gave me a class of heading 3, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to call this my form section heading. So my form section heading, and what I'm going to do is put contact us today. Okay. Now I'm also going to want to bring in some text, and actually what I could do is I could copy and paste this white text from up here. And one thing you can do is it's already got a class, but I could add a secondary class to get more specific, titled black, and then I can change this to black without losing any of my design. I'm going to give a little bit of margin beneath this header down here, maybe 30 pixels. Now we've got our contact us today. I want there to be a little bit of contrast between these two sections, and so I'm actually going to give this a background of a gradient, but I'm actually going to give it just a very slight gray, just like that. And then on this end, I actually want it to go a little bit, just a hint of red. And I'm going to align that this way. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I am going to add a contact form. And so I drag and drop the contact form in here. And obviously it's automatically going to style this and just make it fit our column. And so the first thing that I want to do is I can actually select this blue, and I want to go to the main block of the form, which is the form block. And the first thing I'm going to do is set a max width of 400 pixels. And that is going to limit the size of our contact form, okay? Now I want these text fields to be a little bit bigger and more friendly, so I'm going to set a height of 60 pixels and a height. Actually, you know what I'll do is I will just share this class of text field in here and do that. So we've got our name and email. I actually want to add a phone number field, so I can do a lot of copy and pasting. Add in my phone number field. I'm going to double click that and just verify that this is the phone, and I can click that this is a phone field. And we're getting closer to having our form. I actually want to make this button full width, so I'm going to click on it and I'm going to change the width to 100%. I'm going to give it a little more padding in there. And I want this button to be a nice deep blue. I'm going to increase the font size on that button and double click to change the message to send message. Alright, so what I want to do is I want to add a little bit more style to these. So the last thing that I'm going to do, and this might be a little bit extra, but I'm actually going to remove the background color. I'm going to make that completely opaque. I'm going to come down here and I want to remove the borders, and I'm going to give this one bottom border. I'm going to blow this up to 3 pixel width. And just like that, our form is a little bit fancier with just those bottom lines, okay? Now, I'm not really liking these field labels, so I'm actually going to get rid of these field labels. And what I can do is I can actually double click on these forms, and in my placeholder, I can have there be a placeholder so I don't need a title. So I'm going to put phone for this one, name for that one, and email for this one. And then what I can do is I can blow up this font size, and I'm going to make that bold. And just like that, I have kind of a fancy form. Now if I click my preview, you can see the way this works. When I click on it, I can still input these forms, and just like that, I have my fancy form that I can submit. So going back, the last thing that I want to do is I want to make all of this centered. And so I'm going to go back to my container, and I'm going to name this center container. And then I'm going to go to my flex, vertical, right smack dab in the middle. Now you notice that kind of squishes my form into the middle. So what I want to do is I want to click my form, make sure that I grab my form block, which is the main, like the biggest box of my form. I'm going to select that, and I have a max width of 400 pixels, but I want to make sure that it's at least 350 pixels. And so what I'm going to do is just set the width to 350 pixels. That's going to make it a little bit bigger. And then, of course, I want a little bit of margin on the top to give me some space. And just like that, we have our contact us form, okay? And so just a couple like really basic things that we've gone through really are giving you all the tools that you need to plug things in and start building a website. If there are things that you don't understand with Webflow, the best part is you can just start clicking around and see how different settings change different elements, right? And so it doesn't matter which of these elements you're adding to your project, you're always going to be using your classes to set a standard for the design that they are going to take, and then you're going to be able to adjust your layout, your display, and then you've just got all of these size, position, typography, background. All these are very self-explanatory to get you to the point where you have a design that has everything that you want, and it is completely custom everywhere from the desktop version down to the mobile version. You're going to be able to build out the site of your dreams, okay? So with that, we have covered basically everything that you're going to need to know to dive into Webflow, start designing a site. Obviously, like anything, it's going to take some practice, especially if you want to get to the point where you're building like knockout websites. You're going to have to put some time into practice. And so what I would suggest you do is dive in, spend some time just seeing how things work, seeing how different tools and different settings change the layout of the different elements, and before you know it, you are going to be able to see or think of a design, jump into Webflow, and just knock it out and create it in a matter of minutes, okay? So if you have any questions after this tutorial, make sure you comment them down below. I'd be happy to help you out. But the last thing that I would say is I have designed websites in so many different website builders, from Wix to WordPress to Squarespace, and without a doubt, Webflow is the most powerful and easiest to use. Yes, there is a little bit of a learning curve, but if you truly want to build incredible, responsive websites and have complete control over the design and the performance of your site, there is no better place to be than with Webflow. And so, if you have any issues getting started or you run into any roadblocks, Webflow offers so many free courses and free videos, and they have an awesome support team. They have an incredible Facebook group, the global Webflow group that you can join, and you've got nearly 10,000 people that are ready and willing to help you out. If you're interested, I also have a Facebook group that is called SEO and Webflow, and that is actually a group specifically for those that want to learn how to get their Webflow sites built and get them to rank on Google. So if you're interested in that, there will also be a link down below. But thank you guys so much for watching. Dive in, learn Webflow. It'll change your life, I guarantee it. And we'll catch you guys in the next video.